Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No
Oh,
Darkness But Ours.
Welcome to the second part of our discussion on underground horror. You can find a link to part 1 in the description below. Now, without further ado, here's the second part of our discussion on No Darkness But Ours. Watching a 2011 Australian film called The Tunnel earlier, and which partly takes place in a lot of abandoned railway tunnels under the city of Sydney. And as somebody says at the beginning, she says, "I had no idea there was the extent of this stuff. It's like another city. It's almost like another city under this one."
Yeah, exactly. And and some of it was repurposed as bunkers, and some of it was, like the intention was to have subways.
Yeah,
didn't work out for one reason or another.
Yeah, and so much of this, I recognise this as being from Manchester, where I grew up. There's a couple of very interesting books on underground stuff in Manchester. There are big chunks of it that were kind of used or repurposed for one thing or another, like that for used as air raid shelters during the war. There were things used as landing stages for when the rivers were used for major commercial traffic.
Right.
And there was actually the Guardian exchange, a huge Cold War era nuclear bunker.
Yes.
Sort of communications hub. So you've got all of that stuff. There's also all these stories of other bits of tunnels and all sorts of stuff that no one's quite sure what its origins are. I remember reading one of some people who claimed they'd kind of got into a tunnel under Cateaton Street, which is in the middle of Manchester, and they were like, it was this very narrow and there was like this narrow cobbled street under the present one, and there were like old Tudor buildings there, and very, very big rats, at which point they got the fuck out. But yeah,
it's like the underground. It's like the London Underground, right? Which is not, it's like the London Underground is everything that's under the ground, dealing with the London subway. But at the same time, you go down further, you get into Roman stuff, you probably do get into Tudor stuff. There's isn't there an entire city in Scotland, in
Edinburgh, there's a place called Mary King's Close.
There's
sections in Edinburgh that were just built, where they just built new streets over them.
Yeah, where they just built new streets over them, and they did the same thing in. Was it Austin? No, Seattle. Yeah, you're right.
Night Strangler, the Kolchak film, The Night Strangler takes place.
That's right. And part of Malignant by James Wan takes place in the same.
Oh, right. I need to see that one.
Yeah, you do.
Yes.
It is fucking insane. But yeah, there's an entire section that takes place down there. And so, yeah.
Thinking about
the whole idea of the red layer. The fact is that when you live in a city that has been built up and built up and built up,
almost like it's like stuff gets built over and over and over, and especially in sort of stuff where like somewhere like London, that's kind of sprawled outwards. Other cities have had to kind of make use of a limited amount of space by knocking one thing down, sticking another one on top, and so you have all of these. It's very strange. When I worked at the co-op insurance company in Manchester, there's a little place nearby called Angel Meadow, and it's this beautiful. Now it's like a lovely little park,
right?
But actually, in the 19th century, it was the worst slum in Manchester. Engels wrote about it in The Condition of the Working Class.
Yeah.
And there's even a flight of steps which are called the Angel Steps, because supposedly because it was near the cemetery, and it was near where lots of infants who died as baby infant deaths were buried, and so an angel was said to watch over it. You get all that technology there, but there's all that just lying under the surface. If you didn't have the kind of the signs up telling you the history of the place, you would have no idea.
Like an angel maker, or it's like when they keep breaking into plague pits, right?
Yeah.
It's like you would think that somebody would have made a map at some point. It's like, don't dig there because you're going to break into a plague pit.
of course, this would often be before, a lot of these papers predated the germ theory of disease. People were still often thinking in terms of, the miasma theory, or
Yeah.
that it was caused by demons, or whatever.
So we're just like, um, in there's the salt mines of Kutna. I mean, mines in general
Yeah,
are
yeah.
like horrifying.
There is a brilliant. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I've written quite a few stories that explore the theme of kind of the underground. I mean, there's a story of mine called Below, which was in Terror Tales of the Northwest and got picked up
Cool.
Best Horror, which was based on a lot of these kind of myths and legends and this whole idea of all these different levels to Manchester. And there's also, there's the Narrows, which was based on mine workings near where I lived, in Swinton. There's a place called Worsley, which is now quite a sort of posh little suburb, but was like kind of the epicenter of the Industrial Revolution. The canals there are still sort of like famous for having a kind of orangey colour from all the iron oxide.
Oh God, yeah.
But there's a place there called the Delf, which is an old Lancashire dialect, but literally meaning a delved or dug place.
Yes.
And this is the entrance to I think it's called the Salford Levels. It's like, because this was obviously in the middle of one of the biggest coal fields in the northwest.
Right.
And there are basically several miles of going down about 4 different levels of canals under the ground. And the coal will be brought up in these boats, which basically, if you can imagine a canoe with kind of like steel reinforcing rims on the outside to make more room inside, these were called starvationers.
Yeah.
The appearance, and they'd be propelled by basically, you'd fill it up with coal, and some poor sod would lie on the top, usually with the ceiling about yay far above his.
Oh my God.
Face, and would basically put the feet on the ceiling and walk the boat up through the tunnels.
Wow.
Was this was obviously going to be it was always going to inspire some form of horror fiction, and
there's no way it couldn't.
I mean, I grew up reading a lot of Richard Davis's science fiction and horror anthologies, including the Spectre series, and there was an author he used to publish called Guy Weiner, and I don't know if he ever appeared in anything but a Richard Davis anthology. It was quite possibly a pseudonym, but he wrote a really good horror story called What Happened in the Mine, where a bunch of mine workers, some of them little more than children, of course, during the Industrial Revolution, get trapped by a mine cave-in and are trying to find their way back to the surface. And they go through some of them are just killed in things. It falls and what have you, and then they discover that there are these creatures down there, not kind of like the crawlers in The Descent. They're more like kind of hideous serpentine creatures that slither in the murky
worms
water
of the earth.
Yeah, or kind of like maybe the Lambton worm, kind of something along those lines.
That's true.
I remember that one being I think there's one of them survives, and whether she's actually whether she's actually still compos mentis after all that, whether she the extent to which she can really be said to have survived is very much up in doubt. So yeah, I mean, mines are. I mean, that is us digging. No digging here.
No, absolutely, and often there's that idea of we dug too deep, and we let something out. Elizabeth Engstrom's When Darkness Loves Us is absolutely horrifying. Little novella, I think, basically about a girl who falls down into a subterranean world through like a crevice. And she is down there, and is basically, I think she's pregnant when she gets down there, and gives birth to a child, a son, who then impregnates her several other times, and then eventually she comes back up to help him find a wife, to help him find somebody, or help her grandchildren maybe to find a wife.
Well, some serious Sawney Bean shit there.
Yeah, no,
Which
some
is another...
serious Sawney Bean shit. And yeah, again, the idea of, it's like, well, we're just kind of fucked up people. We found each other. That's great. But I think the best thing to do would be to find a cave somewhere where we can just screw and screw and screw, and then our kids can screw and screw and screw. And, whenever we need food, we can just go out and, grab some people off the road. That side pocket of Ketchum and
off season and offspring.
Off-season and offspring, and which are basically Sawney Bean narratives.
Yes.
There's isolation, and in that isolation, people burrow down into the earth and they create a society for themselves.
Yes.
And that isolation, that isolated society gives birth to these completely feral human beings.
Yeah. We see that time again. It's a motif of cannibalism again as this kind of great taboo, which kind of makes because of course it's the kind of thing that would often make somebody an outcast.
Yes.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, just thinking about it, just having a look at some of the stories, some of the movies I put on my list here. There's The Descent, of course, The Midnight Meat Train.
Yes.
There's another, and Creep, not the Mark Duplass film.
That's right.
2004 film with Frank.
Creep with Sean Harris. It was actually one of the first things I ever saw Sean Harris in.
Yes.
And Harris is this fascinatingly weird-looking dude, a brilliant actor. But, if you've ever seen him, you'd recognize him. He has this strange, downturned face. He almost looks like he's scarred, but I don't think he actually is scarred.
Yeah, but he's very good at playing characters who have that kind of emotional scarring, and of course playing. He was in the TV drama See No Evil, which was about the Moors murders.
That's right. That's right. Played Ian Brady, and he played Cesare Borgia's favorite assassin in the Borgia.
And of course, he's in Possum as well, which is just a fantastic.
Yeah, Possum's amazing. But yeah, this was the first thing I'd ever seen him in, and he is a guy who, through really strange, convoluted circumstances, has just been living in the London Underground.
I'm not quite sure if it's made clear exactly what's made him that way, or he's just not.
I think there's like some implication of medical experimentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I still have my copy of it. I definitely want to watch it again.
I mean, Franca Potente is always amazing, but
yes.
Yeah, so Franca is this fairly high-powered chick who accidentally ends up getting locked inside of the London Underground after all the trains stop, and begins to realize that there is a person down there, the Creep, who picks off whoever is stuck down there.
Yeah. In the same breath as this, we cannot. We have to mention Deathline. Yeah. Mind the doors.
Mind the doors. I mean, the whole point of Deathline is that, while digging a much deeper line in the London Underground, which doesn't end up being used, there's a cave-in, and a bunch of people get stuck down there, and
the company just leaves them.
Yeah, the company just leaves them because fuck it, and and they, and they and their children degenerate until there's basically just one guy left.
Yeah, with his pregnant wife, who then dies, leaving him the last of his entire. And it's Hugh Armstrong, I think, is the name of the actor.
Yeah.
I mean, as with Creep, this is. There are a lot of similarities. One of the strongest similarities is both of these films have a very strong and layered performance by a very, very fine actor in a role that has little or no dialogue.
That's right.
I mean, literally the only thing he says is "mind the doors." They're the only words in English he knows, and he's trying to communicate to this poor girl that he's kidnapped.
Yeah.
All he can do is try and inject different sort of sort of
Mind the
shake.
doors. Mind the doors. Yeah.
She's absolutely, of course, that poor girl's absolutely terrified of him. But yeah, I mean, a remarkable film with wonderful performance from Donald Pleasance as this kind
Yes.
of miserable, sort of cynical and
Detective.
yeah, and makes quite a change from the kind of roles you kind of know him for, where he's often. I mean, the comedian. I don't know if you ever saw Phil Cool. He's retired now, but he was a comedian from Lancashire. Very good impressionist. He had one of these kind of really. He was very good at what they call gurning, kind of very rubber faced, and his impressions were always in. But he did this one routine where he sort of said, "You'll never, sometimes impressionists get bored of doing impressions, so they start doing impressions of inanimate objects like Donald Pleasance." Inanimate, you say? Yes, I suppose so. Simple self-hypnosis helps the nervous system, you say.
That is awful and yet wonderful.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely true. You're absolutely right that, the side pocket is the idea of the degenerated human being who often is the last of his or her breed. And, I say her because the woman from The Woman is very obviously one of the offspring from
It's isn't it? Because cannibalism is kind of marked out as this taboo that once you've done it in narrative fiction, you're seen as effectively having cut yourself off from the rest of human. And of course, we know in real life that doesn't happen. There have been people. I mean, like in interestingly, of course, how the Chilean football team who were stranded in the Andes kind of not exactly mythologized what they've done, but rationalized what they've done as almost into an almost sacramental thing. It was a way of them keeping. We were keeping.
Yeah.
It was
keeping themselves alive and feeling that the dead people that they ate would not have begrudged them this.
Yes.
And that it was a way to remember them. And then, of course, that sort of intrudes into the narrative in Yellow Jackets.
I haven't seen, but I've heard it's
good. Yeah, you absolutely need to see that. In a very weird, out in the woods, girls doing strange magical shit.
Yeah. Of course, the big difference with the Andean football team, now I think about it, is that is what they call survival cannibalism. It's mortuary cannibalism. They're eating people who are already dead.
Yes, as opposed to
Sawney Bean.
Yeah, Sawney Bean is like, I like to eat people because fuck them. It's like it's very Lannister, right? Screw everybody who isn't us.
Yes. It becomes. I mean, there was the thing of like, you kill someone to eat. There's nothing else to eat, so we'll just kill someone and eat them. To the kind of thing where it actually becomes a matter of preference.
Yeah, the transition from the wreck of the Medusa scenario to the terrible the picture in the house scenario. Where, I kind of got a hankering for meat I nor raise,
I mean, in famines, in situations where there are terrible famines, I mean, there are always reports of people resorting to cannibalism to survive. And obviously, in some cases, they'd be eating people who already died. In others, you can imagine, the more desperate sort of grouping together and preying on those who, I mean, again, it would be.
And actually also eating their own kids.
Yeah, that happened a lot. I mean, that's getting straight. That's into some serious symbolic territory, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
There's no future. We're just devouring the future just to stay alive in the present, kind of.
There's a thing in The Walking Dead that I don't think ever got into in The Walking Dead, the comic, that I don't think ever got into the actual the actual series, where the people who they meet who are cannibals, the Terminus bunch, began by eating their own children.
Jesus.
And, and Rick hears about this and he just goes fucking ape shit, But, the thing is that I was watching Hold the Dark not too long ago.
Oh yeah.
On Netflix, and it is absolutely true that the wolf dies but the pack survives. A pack of wolves will eat their youngest members.
Yeah,
that
if
the
you really
breeding
want to take it to
pairs will survive, and then they
you
can
want to take it to the most utterly ruthless kind of brutal survival rationalism. We eat these kids. We can always have more kids later on when we're not.
Maybe we'll name those kids after the kids we ate.
Yes.
I wouldn't personally, but I mean, yeah, who knows? Okay, so all right, so a lot of horror. Okay, I'm gonna go in one direction and then I'm gonna go somewhere else. Okay. A lot of horror either starts underground or ends up underground, and there's this idea of holes leading down, holes leading up, but also holes leading sideways, where you go down into a hole in the earth and you end up somewhere completely different. You know, like, for example, Laird Barron's Old Leech stories, particularly Mysterium Tremendum. Mysterium Tremendum is one of his very long stories, almost definitely a novelette. Possibly, it's like I find it difficult to tell the difference between a novelette and a novella sometimes, but basically a group of friends, two gay couples, go on this hike into the wilderness. They're going up into, I believe, the Appalachian Mountains, and up there is a cave and a series of crevasses that somebody that they all knew, who was a friend of theirs and was into some weird shit, fell into and never got back out of. And the assumption is, and this is, and this is true in a lot of Old Leech stories, and I say the assumption is because this dude eventually comes back and actually tells you this. That, not only did he want to go down into that cave, but when he went down into that cave, he ended up somewhere completely different, like on another planet. The Old Leech is like this, this Lovecraftian kind of god that this endless sucking maw that lives on a planet somewhere on the other side of the galaxy. And you go through Old Leech and you emerge as something different. You emerge as almost like like a grub in the flesh of Old Leech. And at that point, you can come out of any hole anywhere.
Right.
Yes. And, so sometimes in things like the broadsword, you might come out of somebody's wall in their room in a hotel. You might come out from underneath somebody's bed.
I've got a lot of Blair stuff I need to read.
Yeah. Any dark space can become the hole that you can emerge from. And, I mean, it's it'll be a terrible empty wasteland, but he'll be the ruler of it. How you like them apples, buddy? It's like, it is very much like that. It's an absolutely depressing, entropic vision of, I guess, how the universe works, but I guess on some level, all of us kind of feel like, well, maybe the universe is some horrible entropic leech.
Yeah.
Second and crapping and second and crapping and second and crapping,
Like Clark Ashton Smith's is above Sattler, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And you can't, the best thing that you can hope for is that you serve it rather than not serve it. Because you're not going to be allowed to die either way. You're not going to be allowed to get out of this.
It'll be a much less pleasant experience.
Yes, exactly. So, there is this real feeling, and similarly in Jeff Long's The Descent, Jeff Long is obsessed with mountains. He has written a bunch of different stuff about mountain climbing because that's something that he's very into. And so the cave that The Descent begins in is actually, I think, near the top of a mountain in Tibet. So like people are almost at the roof of the world, but there's still a cave. There's still a hole that takes you straight down.
The world's biggest game of snakes and ladders, basically.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's this real feeling that, no matter how high you are when you start, that the upper world is just a thin crust over the underworld. The underworld is much like the sea, so much bigger than anything we know.
There's so much more. Oh, another underground horror one that we have to mention.
Yes.
Henry Kuttner's The Graveyard Rats.
Yes.
Truly terrifying story.
Yes.
I thought the Cabinet of Curiosities adaptation on Netflix not so long ago, it wasn't bad. Obviously it made the protagonist a slightly more sympathetic character than he is in the story, where he's
which is weird because he isn't super sympathetic in the adaptation.
Well, they make him funny, at least.
Yes.
And they also kind of imply that he's kind of resorted to this out of financial desperation, which while it's not exactly admirable.
Stealing from the dead, the worst thing ever. I mean, which okay, so sidelong, The Autopsy. Michael Shay's The Autopsy and the adaptation from Cabinet of Curiosities has some beautiful mine work. The whole thing of being stuck in this mining town, everything revolving around the mine, and then the cave-in, the explosion, which causes this huge rush. Yeah, I know. So there's a bunch of stuff that has been done fairly recently, which revolves around the creepy possibilities of mines. Blackmouth by Ronald Malfi, where When the Night Bells Ring by Joe Kaplan, and The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. And the fact that in Wendig's is very much a sort of image of a Kingian multiverse, where somebody is moving from world to world to world and trying to kill other versions of himself. But how he's doing it is to move through this mine, through this hole at the bottom of the mine, because the mine is a liminal space, right? It's a hole. You go in the hole, you come out the hole, it's a darkness that never goes away. And you go into the dark and you come out of the dark, and maybe you're somewhere else, maybe you're somewhere different.
And you can hear part 3 of our discussion of underground horror at the same time next week. No Darkness But Ours is made possible through generous donations from horror enthusiasts just like you. If you'd like to support us, you can sign up to our Patreon and get access to exclusive content, or you can make a one-off donation via Ko-Fi. Links in the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the comments, share and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Let us know as well if there's anything you'd really like to hear us talking about in the future, and we'll be back with more at the same time next week. As ever, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I remain Gemma Files. And this remains No Darkness But Ours.